I'd like to show you what I've learned about Aztec death and its relationship to the north. It's written in Aztec history that Nanahuatl went north with Quetzalcoatl to map the horizontal and vertical universes. The ultimate goal of the Aztecs going north was to build a wealth and production and to then return to the Valley of Mexico, where they would build the empire they wanted in the place they wanted, the center of the universe. The mapping of the horizontal world is indicated by the grid systems that are all across North America. They're dug into the landscape and can be down to as small as 200 to 300 meters on a side. It's a lot of work to put into this kind of gridding of the landscape. It's not a modern endeavor because it would cost too much money for somebody to actually go out and cut all these roads across this land. If you were to look for a place north of Mexico where the Aztecs mapped the vertical universe, I think it's pretty obvious that you'd have to look at Chaco Canyon. All these sites are laid out with a plan. The buildings themselves record a history of astronomy. You can see how each section of the buildings were built up as they recorded objects in the sky. The rectangular portions of these structures track the moon, and the arced portions track other objects in the sky. And there are actual Aztec calendars built into the buildings at Chaco Canyon, Aztec Ruin, and other sites in the southwest. In this Aztec picture, you can see a guy up on poles who appears to be down in this large hole. And he's using this instrument to measure things in the sky. It's a very complex and accurate instrument, but it can be made from all primitive materials. And if you look at these things as if they're real objects, you can start to figure out that what they actually do, instead of saying everything's a god or a goddess. So while in the north, I believe at Chaco Canyon, the Aztecs associated death with three things: owls, bats, and spiders. And right here outside of Chaco Canyon is a glyph of three owls. It's one of the minor gods of death and for the Aztecs. My experience with mining in New Mexico tells me that there's three things you almost always encounter when you're out prospecting, and that's owls, bats, and spiders. And almost exclusively in mines, that's what you'll find. An occasional ringtail cat or a rattlesnake, but mostly those three things. All this ideology and iconography about death came from the time when the Aztecs were in the north. And I believe that these are actually records of the period when they were in the north, probably from around 800 to 1100. In order to keep their history intact, they would have had to have redrawn these records periodically, and they would have had to have drawn them in exacting detail. So Mictlantecuhtli became the god of death while the Aztecs were in the north. And this big wheel and machine used to dig out shafts may have been called this. In this video, I'm going to ignore the images around the outside and just concentrate on what's going on here in the middle. You can see there's this really big crank wheel that's up on a platform that's held up by all these tree trunks. Underneath it, there's ropes and a device to lower down into the shaft, and then it's all lubricated by blood. So without actually thinking about what this icon was, I was just looking at it, and it appeared to me to be an image of something being lowered down into a shaft. And I'll return to that later. In the upper right, you'll see all this brown area that represents grass, but it's also the burial shroud that has beads on it in the shape of a water icon, which is also a well icon. So if you're looking at this in side view, then it looks like an animal being buried beneath the ground. Look at it in plan view, it's actually reservoir, dam, burials, wells, and grass, and it's almost identical to the grass glyph itself, which is associated with death. has burials in a dam, grass, a well. If you move down, you see the head of this person that's been decapitated has the mask of an eagle that looks just like the eagle on this thing I called a capstone, which might actually be the top of a coffin. Other Aztec images show the same thing that looks kind of like a coffin lid. So I believe that the animal buried in the reservoir is probably this person's totem animal, and that the eagle suit and the eagle head on the coffin lid probably represent that he was an eagle warrior. Note the grave goods, spears, shield, atlatl, and a whole bunch of banners. These are probably the types of things that are in the tombs of New Mexico. I tried to examine these pictures for every little detail I can and tried to figure out if there are things that you could use for different tasks. And of course this was hanging down below by ropes, and it appears that the Olin glyph in the middle might be a hinge. At other times the Olin glyph is represented as a horizontal measuring device. You can also see that this thing may have been able to be converted into a cart. From looking at this image and other images of this god, I believe that this device for digging shafts would have been lowered down into a chamber first. Probably in the most extreme cases down about 100 feet, and then the shaft would be dug out below that. So a burial chamber could be hundreds of feet below the ground. The device would then be taken out and a capstone lowered over that shaft, and this chamber filled and the shaft above that filled. Why did they do it that way? I don't know. It could have been for security reasons, to try to hide the capstone as deep down as they could. So if we look again at this icon at the top, it's the reed icon, and it reads one reed. I believe that this might be a depth indicator, that this machine and this is happening at one reed below the surface, and that's where the capstone would be. Why do I believe this? Well, no matter what you think about the television show Oak Island, I believe the original story that kids had dug down into the shaft, and at intervals there were layers of reeds, and at about 100 feet below the surface they found a capstone with hieroglyphic writing on it. And then when they lifted that capstone, it flooded with water. And I believe that part of the story is true because it fits with what I believe about the Aztec and how they dug these tombs. Right here on the edge of Las Cruces, on a small mountain, there's this mine shaft here with this rock, and I believe that this is a tomb, and that was going to be the capstone for the tomb. Up on the hill nearby, there's a quarry where all these rocks have been pulled out by hand. They're not blasted and broken up. You look from above, well, that quarry forms the eye of this big figure, and that pile of rocks forms the big teardrop of this figure. You can see it there closer. All those rocks came from that hole and are laid out. If you were quarrying here historically, why would you leave all the rock there? And all this disturbance and everything is man-made to form these glyphs. And other mines around here, the Palm Park mine forms a parrot. The Prickly Pear mine forms a skull with a light on his head. This I believe also to be a prickly pear farm. The Poe mine forms a man. The Cook claims by Rincon formed this scene out of an opera. And other drawings by the Aztec appear to show this big machine and the burial process in shafts. So Mictlantecutli is a big wheel used to dig out shafts. They also can be represented as a skeleton in a burial position with a pot on his head, much like a members burial. And I want to go into that in a future video also.